So while you make these black and whites, you're also adding life and color. And you love flowers. Do you have like a reason, an idea behind it?
The flowers for me are all about, they're so symbolic of like how fleeting life is and how precious and how beautiful it is because it is like impermanent. That's something that's important to me about my own work is that it can just be a pretty pretty thing for somebody, and that's okay. Like, we need beauty. It makes people happy, and what's better than that? The most important thing I learned is to just sit down and make something. And that's kind of the secret, Before, I think I was really worried about the product more, like when I was younger. And so I think now I have something to make art about, like life.
Thank you so much for waiting on me. Oh, you know what? I think I have been saying this line for quite a few episodes because every time, because it's so early morning, sometimes I record so early morning, and that is pretty late for you. So this is midnight, like past 10 for you, and my call record was 8 o'clock, and I pushed it a little bit, and I was like, if you can wait for me. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, no problem.
Tell me, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Okay, Caitlin. For anyone who's listening to this podcast, let's begin with um, who you are as Caitlin, and can you talk a little bit about your work, what you do, so that we can go deeper.
Yeah, yeah. I focus primarily on drawing and painting. I think of myself as a portrait artist. I've been focused on drawing and painting wildlife and combined with botanical elements for a few years now. But I do think of, even though they're not non-human animals, I think of them as people.
I love that.
So yeah, yeah, a lot of,
I love
the things that
animals
I
so much.
oh, I know. I think so many people feel really connected to animals, and I live in Montana, which is in the, North American Rocky Mountains, and so they're all around here, like, those animals that I'm drawing are, like, in the woods here, in the forests and in the mountains, all around me. And I'm not originally from here. I'm from the East Coast, near Boston, Massachusetts. And so the move to Montana has really inspired my work.
How long have you been here for? Like, when did you move?
We moved in just after our first son was born. So that was 2011 we moved.
Oh, so that's been quite a few years.
Yeah, he was probably about 10 months old, I think. And then so we moved, and when we first moved here, we moved to the northwestern corner of the state, like kind of close to Canada, in a really, really rural, remote community.
And where were you before that? Like when you were
Boston, Massachusetts. Yeah. And so, and I had never lived outside of like the surrounding area of Boston before. And I moved to this town where my husband actually he grew up there.
Oh, so that was his hometown.
His original hometown, yeah. So he kind of started up there, and then they moved down to where we are now. Because it was a little too rural up there for me, and there was no art. There was no there is no arts community at all. And so we came down to like a bigger it's considered a city in Montana, but it's still very small, like for especially in India.
I saw this blog and I saw Montana in that. So I kind of I'm starting to imagine how it looks like.
Yeah, it's geographically a really large state, but the population density is really small. And so I think in our valley, which is big for the state, I think there's 48,000 people. And the whole state has just over 1 million people. So I love the pace here. It's a great place for our family too. The kids can run around outside all day. So it works for us.
Wonderful. Tell me, how did you grow up while you were growing up? Like, first, I'm very curious. Were you like, did you have any animals around you?
I had like pets, so dogs and cats. But yeah, where we lived, it was suburban, and so people didn't have livestock. And there were deer and things like that in the woods, and like raccoons and sort of squirrels and smaller things, but not like the big antlered um, animals that we have here, or there weren't bears out there. Here it can be kind of dangerous. If you go out in the mountains, you need to carry bear spray.
Oh,
And out
wow,
there,
really?
yeah, yeah, and there's just a lot of wilderness and a lot of open space. So, yeah, it's just a really different way of living from how I grew up.
Wow.
I grew up in it was still kind of a small town, but um, it was right next to another small town. Here, it's like you have a small town and then nothing, and then another small town.
So I think, yeah, I think like, I grew up in a small town, but how things are like, so the city I grew up in, so the capital of India is just 2, 3 hours away from that. So even though it was a smaller city, um, it's been developing a lot, and while we were smaller, um, of course, because technology wasn't there, so the pace of development is not as fast. But it wasn't like a lot of things are not available, because logistically it was still reachable. But there are of course places where when there's just one small section in, like, in an area where there's nothing around, there's so many things that aren't possible to reach there, just logistically as well.
Yeah, yeah, so that's how I felt when we were up north, and, like, growing up near Boston, like, my mom worked in the city, she was a lawyer, and if I would have a day off of school, I would go to work with her, and, we'd do things in the city. She took me to museums and plays and, all kinds of so I had a lot of, like, urban access as a kid. Yeah, and then so when we lived up in this town is called Libby, and I loved a lot of things about it, and I loved the nature, but, we came down here to Bozeman, which is near Yellowstone National Park, and it's a tourist destination, and there's a lot of art galleries, and there's a lot of really talented people in town, and a very vibrant arts community. So, this has been a much better fit for sure.
Okay. Like, tell me something. When you moved here, you didn't expect this kind of wilderness, and it was quite different and refreshing for you. Um, I'm just trying to understand, how did it started to impact your work, and you know, what was your first reaction, and what caught your attention?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I have a history with Montana. When I was a little girl, I did a report on it. We had to choose a state that were, outside of Massachusetts where we lived. And so I chose Montana. And, because my babysitter was from there, and she was amazing, so, it was like a tribute to her, and, I wrote a
Oh,
report on it. So then when I met my husband, like, many years later, and he was like, "Oh, I'm from Montana," I was like, "Is this a sign?" That, because and my mom actually I did this report, and then my mom and I traveled to here to
wow!
check it out. Yeah, so it was like a first big vacation that we'd ever gone on to someplace. It's so far away. The United States is so huge.
Huge,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, it's so big. So Montana and Massachusetts, it's a huge distance. So it was a very exotic vacation that we'd gone on. So I did know what the state was before moving here. And we'd visited my husband's parents are here, so we had visited them a few times. I think one of the things when we did move that I kept thinking about, was the history of the place and, like, the colonialism, and, like, the problematic history.
Okay.
Um, but the history of the state is crazy. It's like the Wild West of, like
Oh,
the
wow.
old Western movies that you see from the United States. So there's a lot of like mythology
Okay.
here, and there was like, a lot of like criminal gangs and things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and like outlaws.
Is this like this happens? Like, is it for real? Like things like this here? Because I see, um, like even on Netflix or like I remember watching Riverdale or something, and they
Oh.
had this town which was it's like it's pretty interesting to see if there's something like this out there.
Oh, this was, like, in the founding of the state, so more like in the
Oh,
1800s. Yeah, so, like,
oh,
when, like, settlers moved, like, European settlers were moving across the
yeah,
United
yeah,
States to the West,
yeah,
and so, like, when they would set up, start making up a town, there was a lot of,
yeah,
like, crazy behavior.
yeah,
So it's not like that now at all.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot, like, calmer. But, yeah, so just the ideas about the history, the way that, like, people had moved west was kind of interesting to me, and I was more familiar with the history because I love history. I was more familiar with the history of, like, the northeastern part of the country, and so learning about just all of the particulars out here and, like, all of the indigenous tribes and things that still exist today, um, was really, really interesting to me, and so it started to kind of show up in my work, um, pretty soon after we moved here.
How?
Just like I started actually drawing some of the figures, like, from old photographs of the historical figures and combining them with the floral elements.
So in that figures, was it like at that point also were that animals?
There weren't so many animals then, it was mostly human people, so this was yeah, so that was kind of what I was doing when we first moved here, and I'd also just had a second baby, so I had, like, these 2 babies, and so I was making really small pieces, they were, like, 5 inches by 5, and, things that I could, like, take out when they would go to sleep and then, put away when they woke up really quickly. And I didn't have a dedicated studio space at that time, but I was talking to my husband earlier, and he was like, "You always figured out some way to be making something." Um, and I had left my arts community behind in Massachusetts. I was part of this local community out there. So when we moved here, everything, yeah, I just started like my work changed a lot, and I just started kind of playing around with new images and ideas, that I pulled from my new surroundings.
Were you afraid when your work was changing?
I don't think I was. I think I was more just really curious. I was afraid after I had my first son was a scary time.
But by that time, were you here? Where were you then?
Like, I know kind of what you're asking. Those
Yeah,
moments where, yeah,
yeah.
you experience fear and, like, "Who am I?" feelings, and that was back in Massachusetts because I'd been making huge work on paper, like enormous pieces on paper, and I had a studio outside the house. And then my son was born almost 2 months early, and so it was this, like, really abrupt, and I was
Oh,
teaching a lot,
yeah.
and so I had to call my classes and say, like, "I just had this baby, and we are in the hospital." So I had a real identity crisis at that time too because
Because you weren't also prepared, I think.
yeah, I wasn't we did not have a crib or anything ready for this baby.
No, no, not even in that sense. I think, like, when you're, let's say, I think, I think this happens to me a lot, and I keep telling this to people around me because I'm not a person like, for me, change is always hard. But for me, if anything comes too suddenly, and I haven't prepared myself mentally, and not only in the sense of physical, but also talking to myself and telling myself, okay, this is what's going to happen. I know it's not going to be easy. I know there's a huge pay, like, so I have to explain myself that there's a change. that's going to happen, and I have to train my mind. And I think every time when I know that this something like this is happening, and if I get even a little bit of time to do that, I with I have a lot of anxiety issues, I have ADHD, so it just helps me manage myself a lot more better. Versus if you put me from one point to another, and completely, like, it's like it just completely shakes you. For me, those situations are terribly hard. So, like, when you're moving to Montana, you knew that, it wasn't like a one day made that move. You knew it would be disrupting your regular routine. It'll be a new way. But also having a baby 2 month prior, also having a baby in itself is like, I don't think you can prepare as much. Like, after being a second time mother, now you must know. But I'm sure at the first time it wasn't that easy.
It was, yeah, it was really, I'm the same way, and I also have ADHD, so I totally know change is the worst. It's the worst. And I feel like I'm 44 now. I feel like I'm finally kind of getting a little better. And we even were talking as a family the other day that this time, like my kids just finished the school year, so they're on like a 3 month break before they'll go back in the fall. And every year I'm like a basket case around this time just because it's a change. We're not in our school routine. And this is the first time I've been like, okay. So, because it kind of like my studio schedule, then I'm like, when am I going to make my art? But um, yeah, yeah. So those different moments, I'm not very fearful. I'm really, really confident in my actual making process. So, like when I have a new idea, I'll just try it. I won't,
You like the chase, yeah.
I'm really curious. So when I get an idea, I just want to see like, oh, what would happen if I um, did, this sort of old Western figure with flowers all over it, coming out of its head. And I don't have to show it to anybody,
Yeah,
if I don't like it. But
yeah.
it quickly, uh, yeah, when I moved here, there are so many galleries here downtown. So I put like one of my babies in like a carrier and I just started walking through the galleries and I met one of the owners, and then she started following me on Instagram, and she asked if I could show there. Um, and so yeah, I was able to quickly start having some shows here and selling work through these galleries here, as I was making that new stuff. So that was fun.
Let's circle back to the point where I asked you, how did the wilderness pique your interest? That's, I think, what was your first conversation when it started to tweak, like, pique your mind?
Yeah, like when it started, well, it's always been in my work, even before I lived here. So the things I was making back east, they, um, I'm trying to think because I've gone through so many different phases in my work. So just before we moved, I was making these huge um, watercolors on paper, and they always had animals interacting with people, and they kind of were like very fairy tale like. So they looked a lot like illustrations. So there would be like a figure and like um, fish raining down from the sky. So I was always just, nature has always been, for a very long time, even before living here, has been something I was really interested in. And so then when we moved here, instead of having to find like pictures on the internet of the animals that I wanted to draw, I could just like go see them here. So I feel like my connection to the wilderness has deepened a lot, like my real life connection. And I think I always wanted a connection to it, and that's what my old work was kind of about. Like I wanted the connection, and now I really sort of feel one. Like I feel like an authentic um, face to face time with it.
No, I get it. Okay. So, um, once you started getting into this work, um, what was your first, I think, in the sense of medium also, did you, uh, did moving here impacted that for you? I'd always been interested in fashion materials, always had them in my studio, but never had them like, never used them as much. And when I came back to my hometown, I realized like I started feeling a lot more connected to them. And the way I was responding to those materials were a lot more different than I was while I was in the city. So I think your surroundings also really, even if you have the same material, if you're somewhere else, versus if you move to a different location, they talk to you differently. Let's talk about that also.
Oh, yeah. So one of the reasons why I started drawing with the scratch board that you've probably seen, the black and white portions of my work, um, I started doing that back in Massachusetts, but then I'd kind of put it away. And then I think I just had it with me when we moved, and I didn't have any space and it was really small. And so it was like sheer practicality that urged me to get it out. Yeah. So the initial was just simply practical. But then, um, and in the beginning, I was working like it was white background and I was painting and drawing black ink and then scratching a little bit. So it was very white with a little bit of black. And now it's a lot of black with white. And that switch, yeah, so that switch happened. I had um like that's kind of the traditional way that scratchboard works with the black and people scratch into the white. And I had another experience that kind of prompted me to start to to do it that way. I'm trying to it's my medium's a little hard to understand. So if maybe I'll explain that like it's a white clay and then you paint black ink on it and then you scratch with tools back into the black ink,
Okay.
revealing white underneath.
Right. Yes.
And
Yes.
so yeah, and so the way that I work now, it's kind of like excavating a little bit. That's what it feels like to me. And when 7 years ago, I had breast cancer, and so um, when that happened, it was like very disruptive to our lives, obviously. But my worldview changed a lot, and so yeah, and so one of the things that I kept experiencing while I was going through treatments was just how much joy there is even in, like, these awful moments, like, I kept experiencing, like, just the amount of community that came and supported us and just how we coped and how we were able to still have a lot of fun and, like, a good time, while I was getting chemotherapy. And so I kept thinking about I didn't consciously do this, but I started wanting to paint the whole thing black and then carve out that light in it. Um, and so, like, as the process is very meditative and it takes a really long time because I use like tiny tattoo needles to create these forms. And when you're working on it, it feels like you're slowly illuminating the form and kind of uncovering it and revealing it. And so that felt like really true to how I was thinking about the world after sort of going through this experience. And then the color came in because it sort of that those moments of like inexpressible joy that are always kind of available even in these sort of darker times. And so that's how that arose. Like that was a really big switch in my work. sort of during that time. And then I find more and more connections as I spend more time with the media. So, another thing that I love here is that there's a lot of dinosaur fossils that are found in Montana, and we have this museum here in town. Called the Museum of the Rockies, and they have a lot of fossils, and you can watch people like excavating them, like digging them out of these plaster casts. And when we first moved here, I was like, that's what I want to do when I retire. Like, I want to touch dinosaur bones. And they use similar tools to like my scratching tools to like dig them out. And so I like that connection to like the idea of like finding artifacts and how it's like a really slow process.
So while you make these black and whites, you're also adding life and color, and you love flowers. Let's, what is the idea? I think let's dig a little deeper into, because I feel like it's a lot more than what we it looks like. Um, and I really like the idea when you associate it with like how you're finding light into the darkness. And I think even while I'm also doing a lot of my work, I think a lot similar. So I'm interested in knowing, like, how did color came into it, and do you have like a reason, an idea behind it?
I mean, so part of the idea is this pure self-indulgence is that I love to paint as much as I love to draw, and so I didn't want to pick pick one. So I figured can I figure out a way for these two to work together? But the other piece of it is that I I really the flowers for me are all about, they're so symbolic of like how fleeting life is and how precious and how beautiful it is because it is like impermanent. And so I think like the beauty of that is inseparable from the impermanence. I think if we lived forever, it wouldn't be special. So that's kind of what the flowers represent for me. And then the way that I combine them with the black and white, I really like the idea of sort of these different different worlds coming together and layering on top of each other. So the flowers that I paint are all garden, they're cultivated flowers. And so they're not usually not wildflowers. And so, but uh, like the main subject of the piece is usually like a wild animal. And so I like that tension between the cultivated and the
And
wild.
wild, and the light
Yeah,
and the
and
dark.
then exactly, like those dualities are so interesting to me, and I think that I like I think about the garden a lot as like a site, just the idea of a garden in general as a site where we can connect with nature as human beings. In so many ways we've like pushed it away. And then, but I think like when we go and we plant something in the ground and nurture it, we're touching nature or we're like getting back to it a little bit. So I like, yeah, that's what that means to me.
Love that. I love that. Okay, one last question before I ask you a rapid fire and let you go.
Yeah.
You've come a long way, like, and while even speaking to you, and I'm sure there must have been a lot more that I don't know yet. But, I feel like this sense of, I think when I lost my mom in the last couple of years to now, I have grown 100 times more than I've ever grown in all my life. And I feel like
Yeah.
experiences, loss, or traumatic experiences, or anything like that, really shakes you, but also like it just brings you out something very differently in you. That, like, it's like, this meditate, like, it's not meditative in the sense of that, but it's also numbing. this process of
Yeah.
excavating something, like, you know,
Mhm.
life is excavating, like bringing something out of you with those
Mhm.
experiences. And when, as and while you're saying this, like, you know, you've had breast cancer, also moving, I think, uprooting your life from one place and then, you know, finding base into another. I don't know if everyone who's done that, I've done that so many times. And as you speak, and I think also with family, a lot of things change. So I think all of these things really impact us of who we are, and of course our work. Can you talk a little bit about who you were as a young artist, in the sense of who was just beginning into their, you know, in their career, to now
Yeah.
someone who's gone through those experiences? Because I keep thinking like this, you know, I was just thinking the other day, you know, a couple of years later, I would look at this thing very differently, and I would have this kind of urgency, or the fear of missing out, or like a lot of things which sometimes I don't feel in a lot of places now. So my question, my direct question is,
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about this evolution and who you were? And
Yeah.
like, you know, as a young artist who was just getting there, to now someone who's been doing it for over the years, has also seen shades of life, and I think that really does impact you, your work, everything.
Mhm. Yes. I was reflecting on this today in preparation, so I feel prepared. Uh, um, yeah, when I first, especially, I went straight from college to graduate school, and when I was in graduate school, it was very uncomfortable because I had always, even from the time I was very, very little, excuse me, I'd loved making things with my hands. I had a deep desire to create. I loved experimenting with art materials and taking art classes, and I majored in art in college. Then I went straight to graduate school, and that was like very uncomfortable because I was 22 years old and like nothing had happened to me yet. And so I had this desire to create, but I didn't know what to create. And so I needed, and so I flailed around in graduate school, but I got through it okay. And then for those first few years afterwards, I was really experimenting with different media. I was doing a lot of watercolor, and I'd originally been an oil painter. So I just kept switching media, just kind of experimenting with just anything I could get my hands on. And so I think those first years were very experimental. I think I was just very experimental artist, just trying things, and then and the work was like interesting, but I don't think it had. I didn't really understand what it was about, which is okay. I don't think you need to understand what and looking back, I was like, I still don't really know what it was about. But now I think like I'm very clear. Like I really understand my work, and I always make it from a completely intuitive space. I try not to think too hard. So I think too, the artist that I am now, I have a very like defined process, and I'm very process oriented. And before, I think I was really worried about the product more, um, like when I was younger. And so I think now I have something to make art about, like life. And so
I think that is in itself, like, yeah, I think I really do agree with that. I think I feel one of the biggest differences is, um, at that point, I think, you know, it's like you need to look for depth, and, you know, you're trying to digging in and you're feeling, and I feel like that depth, and that's a like that that layer inside, it's not something that you can just dig in. It's when you go in, and all these years later, with all these experiences later, I feel like now I am really not trying. I think, in fact, I feel very completely opposite, in the sense like I do not want to sound deep. I don't want, like, I really want to, like, just where I am in my life or wherever I'm feeling, just connect to that. And a lot of times that becomes in itself a lot more deeper, because of course we've matured, grown into seeing life, still seeing life, and that layer has only made it, like, um I think as a I think, to reframe it, I think as young artists, as someone who would just, I think I would make things a lot more complex, because that made me feel like, okay, that maybe I'm truly doing something or doing good or doing enough. And versus now, the simpler the better, as simple as it can get. I think for me, that's become like, now I don't think about how to do more, and I think about how do I do this in the most simplest way. So I think that's also changed for me.
I love that. I think that your point too about, like, we don't have to try so hard. It's like, it just and I definitely did that too as a young artist, especially in graduate school, like, everyone's asking you what your work is about all the time. And so you're, like, making things up, I mean, I was really trying to be honest, but you're like, "I don't" uh,
I think one, and why I think this is, what really happened. Let me share this fun instant, and with no, no other intention. And I remember, because I think I was in that place myself. Recently, I was interviewing someone for one of our hidings for our team, and I met this really young girl, and I asked her, and she was just 18 years old, and she came for the interview, and I asked her, what, I don't know. I mean, you're pretty young. She just given her 12th exam or something. And I was like, why aren't you going to college? Why are you looking for a job and all of that? And have you ever worked somewhere? And so she started, to my total surprise, she started with the idea, oh, I have been working a lot. I have a lot of experience. And it took me a little, you know, took me by surprise. And she was like, oh, I've been the head of HR, I've been head of marketing, and I've done this and I've done that. And to me, in my mind, I kept on thinking, okay, when? Like, when? And I kept on asking her, like, "So why, when were you doing this? Where were you doing this?" So, and I told her, and I told her very, like, I had a very honest chat with her, and I told her, what? I understand where you're coming from. I think I also understand, because I've been there. When I started my career, I feel like to get a good job, or to, in this competitive place where we feel like to reach somewhere, we have to feel like we are extraordinarily, or we're doing so much, and like, but I think that is the first wrong thing we ever get, I think. And I told her, what, as someone who's looking at you, who probably would want to bring and work with you and bring you in our team, I have nothing. I'd be more than happy. I do not have a problem with you being young. I think that's amazing, because I feel like you have an amazing canvas. There are so many things that you learn now, that you'll do, that you'll uncover, and that excites me. What really puts me off is that I don't want you to, while you're even starting, you feel the pressure that you have to be someone that is truly reflection of you, who you are not. And I think this part is what really, like the pressure of, it's also a lot of self-imposed pressure, like, but how sometimes we feel like we have to be a certain way to get ahead in life. Like, I have to be this serious artist who's always in the studio, or this artist who really, like, so we have these notions on how success comes, what being good and bad is. And I think it's a lot more like also parenting. So I have nephews and nieces now. I don't have like my own children, but raising them, with my sister-in-law, like, we keep thinking about, like, okay, the more we tell them of it, this is good and bad. So are we telling them, like, You know, how a lot of complexity, but also like our lives also work that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, that is, I think that is something that I really like about art. It's like you can have fun, like you if you choose to be even in the most serious work that you look at, you can choose. I think it's also like it's art has layers. You can go as deeper as you
Mhm.
want in that moment if you feel like, and if not, you can just look at it as a beautiful piece, as an absurd piece, as a as like it talks to you just from the place that you are in.
Yes, and I like that's something that's important to me about my own work is that it can just be a pretty pretty thing for somebody, and that's okay. Like, we need beauty. We like, it makes people happy, and what's better than that?
But were you okay while you were young?
Oh, thinking that way?
Yeah,
Um, no, I took
yeah,
myself very seriously,
yeah,
and I can remember my mom telling me, "You know, one day you'll probably take yourself less seriously, and, like,
yeah,
that that'll be good." And I was like,
yeah.
She's wrong." But she was right, you know?
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Thank you so much for your time. I really had a good time speaking to you. I have a rapid fire for you before I let you go. Yes, a little fun before we go. Okay, here we go. What was the first thing that made you fall in love with the arts?
Oh, In Love, a Claude Monet show that my mom took me to at the Museum of Fine Arts when I was 8.
Wow, wow. What inspired you to become an artist?
I couldn't help it. I was just going to.
What is the most important lesson you've learned through all these experience in the arts, and probably if you feel called to, as a woman in the arts?
Oh, I think I love what we were just talking about not taking yourself too seriously or learning how to not take yourself too seriously. Um, I think the most important thing I learned is to just sit down and make something. And that's kind of the secret, you know? Yeah.
I feel like I'm tossed into these two personalities, where one
Mhm.
half of me is like, I don't care how big impact I make, what I do,
Yeah.
as long as I'm living and I'm creating even little things,
Mhm.
my purpose is fulfilled. And then there is this
Yes.
another person in me who's like, I have this power to create and I want to create something that change, helps other people, impacts other people. But I just think at the end of the day, just having those little, and I feel like the most commercial, successful, all of these things that you get, commercial in the sense of you're getting more work and all, the
Mhm.
quiet moments of just making something for yourself in the bed, or just painting a little something, or making a sitting, I think it's so much more precious than anything else we do, at least to me. Like,
Yeah.
I really enjoy that time, really do.
I agree.
Okay, my next question. What's the best piece of advice you've been given by another artist?
There's so many good ones. I have to just pick one. I'll pick one real quick. The most important advice that I ever received was you just have to sit down and make a lot of things, and then something will happen. That was my graduate student advisor told me to do that.
What has been the biggest challenge for you in your creative career?
Early on, I think, well, maybe the biggest challenge has been um, maybe financial stability. I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
yeah, to be totally honest.
And I think it's important to keep this out there because it's really like the more real we can get to each other, I think it only helps other people to plan better, to find ways better, to, like, to look for how they can do better than people who've done so far. Okay. Are you an early morning or a late night? Which is your preferred time for creating?
Early morning, early
Oh,
morning.
how early?
Um, so usually 6, but I'm trying to push it even earlier. So I've been just for 2 days though. So for 2 days I've been getting up at 5:45. So, but tomorrow I get to sleep in.
And you come to the street studio, right?
I come in, yeah, it's just across the hall from our bedroom. And so I work in here and then my kids wake up about an hour and a half later. So then I can help them get ready for whatever they need to do.
Music or silence? What do you like more while you're creating?
Music,
Okay, one last question. What is what advice would you give in one word for anyone who's listening to this episode?
patience.
Ooh, that's a good one. Real one. I love that. Perfect. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Before I let you go, please let us know if you have something that you're working on that you'd like to share with us, any new projects, anything that we can support you with, how people can find you, support you, follow you. Please let us know.
Oh, yes. So I'm on Instagram at Kaetlyn Able. And my spelling of my name is very strange. It's Kaetlyn. And then Able is like the word Able. So I do share a lot on Instagram. And then I do have a website, which is CaetlynAble.com. And I'm preparing for shows coming up in the fall right now. So, yeah, if you tune into my website, you can also sign up for my newsletter because I let collectors know when new work is coming out. And I sell prints through my website too, and also internationally through Etsy shop as well. All of those links are in my Instagram. Yeah, it's a lot of links.
So we'll link everything in the show notes. And thank you for everyone who joined us. And we'll see you back in another episode. And thank you so much, Caitlin, for your time. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Charuka. Yes, take care. Bye.